Hey everyone, it's been a while. I'm back with new stories and fresh visuals created by me in Unreal Engine 5. Make sure you stay until the end. There's some important channel news you won't want to miss. I hope you're ready for this. My father used to live in public housing when I was in elementary school. It was pretty sweet actually, because about 5 or 6 friends of mine lived in the same building. It was a pretty dated apartment block. Back when I was a kid, and I'm showing my age here, RC cars were popular. One of the kids, who was more well off than the rest of us, had a little 4-wheel drive remote control car, and I absolutely loved it. We used to drive that little car through all the communal areas of our building. We would zip that car through all the hallways, down the stairs, and around the entrance where all the mail slots were. Back then, we were always discouraged from playing on the 7th floor. My parents said to stay away, and so did my friends. There was a good reason to be cautious. On that floor lived a woman who seemed to despise children. We were even told to walk past her place in silence, as she was likely to be hostile for seemingly no reason. We figured out quite quickly that if you made any form of noise in front of her place, then she would come out and chase you off. So for us kids, we saw that as an opportunity to dare each other. One afternoon after school, we were playing with the RC car, and one of my friends mentioned driving it past the crazy lady's apartment on the 7th floor. Well, all my friends were really enthusiastic about doing this, but I was being a bit of a chicken, if I'm perfectly honest. I didn't want to get into trouble with my parents. So the owner of the car revved up that little remote control car and drove it past the lady's apartment. They all bolted after the car, but I was still feeling a little reluctant to join in, and this proved to be the biggest mistake I made that year. Maybe ever, actually. I was jogging along behind my sprinting friends. They were laughing and screaming, and just as soon as we passed her door, it shot open and she came charging after us. I think I would have gotten away from her if the kid in front of me was moving a bit quicker. He stooped to pick up the car, and that was when I felt her hand land on my shoulder. That hand swiftly moved to my wrist, and then my wrist was pulled upwards behind my back in a painful jolt. I was caught. I was terrified. I couldn't move because I was restrained. I doubt I would have been able to move either, because I was experiencing true fear for the first time in my young life. The origin of that new fear came from what I saw in her other hand. A kitchen knife. She stood there, seething with anger, staring into my eyes with unwavering eyes of her own. She didn't speak. She just stared at me with a blank face. Then she dragged me, pulled me, and shoved me into her apartment. I couldn't do a thing. She had a knife. All of my friends had gone. I felt so helpless. As soon as I was through the door, she locked it, and I began to panic. Due to my panic, my memory from here is a little vague, to say the least. I remember that all the windows and curtains were shut, and everything in there was dark. It had a strange smell, like incense sticks or something. I started crying, and I couldn't stop. I found no sympathy on her face when I paused to wipe my eyes. I was deeply concerned for my well-being. She handed me a baked cookie, and this was the first time she spoke. She said, "Eat." I didn't have much choice, so I ate. I remember it tasted horrible. It didn't even taste like a cookie. I remember trying to hide pieces of it under the table, because I couldn't bring myself to eat it all. I don't know how long had passed, I don't remember much. Later, I did hear a familiar voice at the crazy lady's door. That voice belonged to my mother. I didn't know if it was real or not, but I later found out. Also, there seemed to be another woman living with the crazy lady. I don't remember much, but she said she wanted to help me get home, and I felt like she was my savior. Then I remember crying. I don't know what I was crying over, but it could have been relief. Relief that I was going to be let out of that horrible apartment. I remember police officers and my mother shouting and shouting my name. After that, I knew I went to see a counselor, and I remember being way behind all the other kids at school for a while. Something really weird happened, and I'm not sure if not remembering it is a bad thing. As far as I am concerned, it is all in the past, and I thank my lucky stars that I'm not too traumatized. Whenever I mention it to my mother, even as an adult, she makes a face. She doesn't want to talk about it. She still seems distressed. I have 2 questions I'm scared of knowing the answer to. Number 1, what was in that cookie? And number 2, what happened in the periods of missing time I cannot account for? I live in a pretty quiet neighborhood. Small houses, close together. Everybody knows each other just enough to wave and make small talk, but not enough to actually be in each other's business. The family next door moved in maybe a year before I did. Nice enough, young couple. 1 kid and a boy who's around 7. He's one of those kids who talks to everybody, not in an annoying way, just very open. If you're outside watering plants or getting the mail, he'll come over and tell you something completely random about dinosaurs or school or whatever game he's into that week. A few days ago, I was by the mailbox while he played in his yard with a small plastic basketball hoop. We exchanged hellos like usual. Then, out of nowhere, he casually asked, "Why do you come into my room if you don't talk?" At first, I thought I must have misheard him. I said, "What?" And he says, "At night, you just stand by my door and look at me." I laughed. What else can you do when a kid says something like that? I figured he probably had a dream or was mixing me up with someone on TV. I said, "That's not me. I've never been in your house." And he just kind of shrugged and said, "Okay," like it didn't matter. That should have been the end of it, except his mom came outside a minute later to call him in, and I mentioned it because I'd thought she'd laugh too. I literally said something like, "Hey, I think he had a weird dream about me or something." She didn't laugh. She just went completely still for a second and then asked, "What exactly did he say?" So I told her, and her face changed in this way that made my stomach drop immediately, because it was obvious this was not new information. She said, "He's been saying that for weeks. Apparently, he told both of his parents more than once that the lady from next door comes into his room at night and stands by the door looking at him. Not every night, but enough that they started leaving the hallway light on because he was getting upset before bed." I kept insisting, "It's not me, I swear, it's not me." She said she knew, but honestly, she didn't sound completely sure. It was more like she believed that I believed it. That bothered me more than if she'd just accused me straight out. For context, I live alone. I am a woman in my early 30s. I work normal hours. I'm not friends with them beyond the basic neighbor stuff. I've been inside their house exactly once, for maybe 2 minutes, when they first moved in, and a bunch of us on the street were doing the whole awkward neighbor introduction thing. I've definitely never been anywhere near their kid's room. The weirdest part is that his room is on the side of their house, facing my backyard. You can see the window from my kitchen if I'm standing at the sink, and from part of my yard if I'm out by the fence. So once she told me that, I started feeling really sick, because it wasn't just that he said a woman was in his room. He specifically said it was me. I asked her why he thought it was me, and she said he kept saying, "The lady next door," and pointing at my house. Then she added, almost like she regretted saying it, that he said the person had my hair. I have pretty long dark hair, not exactly rare, but still. After that, I went back inside and locked my back door in the middle of the afternoon, which I don't usually do. That night, I found myself looking out at their house without really meaning to, not in a creepy way, just because I suddenly noticed how our homes lined up. It felt like I was seeing the layout for the first time. From my backyard, if you stand near the fence, you can see straight towards his window. There are curtains, but if the light is on inside, you can usually tell whether they're open or closed. I wondered if maybe he'd seen me outside at night once, and his mind turned it into something else. Kids do that. That seemed like the most normal explanation, and that's what I tried to believe. But the thing is, I'm not outside at night. I'm not the type to sit in the yard in the dark. I'm usually inside by around 8, unless I'm taking out the trash. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I almost convinced myself it was just an awkward kid misunderstanding, and I needed to let it go. That evening, I saw his dad outside while I was bringing the groceries in, and he brought it up without me saying anything. He was polite about it, but there was something strained underneath. He asked, "Have you ever been out in your yard late at night?" "No," I said. "Like ever?" he asked. "Not unless I'm bringing trash cans in or something," I replied. "Okay," he said, but in a way people do when they don't know what else to say. I asked him what his son had actually been saying, and he told me the same thing, just with more detail than his wife had shared. Apparently, their son said I come in at the same time as the red numbers. I didn't understand what that meant at first, but then his dad said the kid has one of those little digital clocks in his room, and says it usually happens when the numbers are 2-something. So now, there was a time attached to it. That bothered me more than it probably should have. Not because 2 a.m. means anything on its own, but because that kind of specific detail makes things feel less like imagination. That night, I did something I'm not proud of. I stood in my dark kitchen and stared toward their house. His room light was off. The rest of the house was dark too, except for a lamp downstairs. Everything looked normal. I told myself I was being ridiculous and went to bed. Then sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up for no reason. Not from a sound exactly, more like that feeling when your body wakes you up before your brain catches up. I checked my phone, and it was 2:14. I was wide awake instantly. I lay there for a minute, listening and feeling a bit silly. Then I heard it, from outside, a soft metallic sound, like the latch on my back gate. I sat up in bed and listened harder. Nothing. I got up and went to the kitchen, but I didn't turn the light on. I just stood there, looking out through the glass over the sink. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I saw movement near the fence line between my yard and theirs. Just a shape, person-sized, still for a second, then shifting slightly. I actually froze. Not dramatically. I just couldn't move for a few seconds because my brain was trying to make sense of it. Then the shape moved again, and I realized it was on their side of the fence, not mine. I couldn't see a face, just someone standing there, partly turned toward their house, toward his window. I stepped back so fast, I hit the counter behind me. A second later, when I looked again, the yard was empty. I don't know if the person moved or crouched down or what. I just knew I couldn't see them anymore. I didn't go outside. No way. I stayed up until morning, with every light in my house on. The next day, I went over and told the parents what I saw. They both looked awful, like they hadn't slept either. The mother asked if I was sure, and I said no, not completely. But I was as sure as I could be, without pretending to see more than I did. That's when the father told me something he hadn't shared the night before, because he didn't want to scare me. A couple of times, when they went into their son's room after he called for them, the window was unlocked. Not open, just unlocked. He said they kept assuming one of them had forgotten after opening it earlier in the day, but they'd started checking it before bed because of what the kid was saying. I asked if anyone else had access to the house, family, babysitter, old keys, anything like that. They said no. I asked if the kid had maybe seen someone outside the window and just translated that into, in my room. The father said maybe, but the mother said, he always says she's inside, not outside, inside. Then she said something that gave me chills. She said the first few times, he didn't say it was me. He just said, the lady. It only became the lady next door after one evening when he saw me wave to him over the fence while he was playing outside. So basically, the face he chose to put to it was mine. That should have made me feel better, since it meant he probably wasn't actually seeing me. But honestly, it made me feel worse. Because then who was he seeing before that? A few nights later, they installed cameras outside and in the hallway by his room. The dad also put a cheap contact alarm on the kid's window. For about a week, nothing happened. Then, the hallway camera caught something inside the house. Nothing like that. It caught the kid waking up at around 2:10 a.m., sitting straight up in bed and looking at his doorway like someone was there. He stayed like that for almost a full minute before calling for his mom. Nobody ever showed up on camera. The window alarm didn't go off either. But the kid kept insisting afterward that the lady had been there again, just quieter this time. The parent showed me the clip because at that point, all of us were trying to figure out whether this was some kind of sleep issue or if someone had actually been creeping around outside and freaking him out. Watching that video bothered me way more than I expected because there was no one there. You just see this little kid wake up and stare at an empty doorway like he's looking at a person. After that, I started closing every blind in my house before it got dark. I also put a motion light in my backyard. Nothing really happened after that, or at least nothing concrete. The kid still occasionally said he saw the lady, but less often. The outdoor camera caught a raccoon one night, and one of the father's co-workers cutting through the side yard another time, but nothing that explained the whole thing. I ended up moving a few months later for unrelated reasons, and I almost forgot about all of this. Then last week, his mother texted me out of the blue. All it said was, "He stopped talking about her after you moved." That was it. No follow-up, nothing else. I know there are normal explanations for most of this. The kid having vivid dreams, seeing someone outside once, or just attaching my face to it because I'm the neighbor he knows best. Maybe someone was sneaking around the yard, which is worrying enough. But I still think about standing in my kitchen at 2:14, looking out at that shape by the fence. And I still think about the fact that whatever he thought he was seeing in that room, he was sure it was a woman, and he was sure it was me. This happened recently, but enough time has passed for me to feel okay about talking about it. I was a student when this went down, and I was a pretty shit student at the time. I spent most of my academic years gaming online, ignoring my university classes. I would play from morning until night. What a total waste of time, huh? I was completely glued to my computer's monitor. I was barely aware of my surroundings. I would look up, and I'd see the first light of morning without realizing a night had passed. I knew I would probably have to repeat a year, but for some reason, I just didn't care. If I was going to repeat a year, I was going to have fun doing it. There I was one night, no different than any other, computer mouse clicking away, gaming, when suddenly the doorbell rang. Like most apartments, my one had a doorbell down below on the street, which connected to my room. When someone comes, they'd press the doorbell, and then I'd buzz them in, and they'd head upstairs. It's a pretty common setup, right? On that night, the doorbell rang at 2 a.m. I only noticed the time because I had to pause my game. I thought about going over to see who was there, but I hesitated. The first thought that came to my mind was that it would be a pain in the ass to leave the game. Not who the hell would be ringing the doorbell so late. When I thought about the latter, I realized that a late-night unannounced visitor wouldn't probably be someone I'd like to deal with. So I ignored the doorbell and carried on with my game. I thought that whoever was out there would give up after about 5 minutes or so and go home. Anyway, this person's persistence surpassed my expectations. They rang the doorbell continuously for over 10 minutes. I had no idea who would want to see me this bad in the middle of the night, so I kept on ignoring it. It pissed me off. Have you ever heard a doorbell repeatedly ring for 10 minutes straight? Finally, the doorbell stopped ringing, and I thought that was the end of that, but boy, was I wrong. Before I knew it, I could hear something outside my patio doors. I lived on the ground floor. I could hear the sound of feet rushing around out there. There was someone out there, and now they were leaning against the frosted glass and attempting to peer into my room. I barely had a second to think about what to do when I heard, "Ah, so you are awake. Get out here." It was screamed with such rage. I knew the owner of that voice was a female. She seemed hysterical. She started hammering on my windows. I had no idea who she was. Despite my curtains being drawn, I guess there was enough light spilling around the edges for her to realize that someone was home and awake. I really began to panic now. I didn't know what to do. I knew that this person wasn't just going to give up and walk away anymore. We were past the doorbell ringing now. While she was blasting her hands against my windows, I tried to think about what to do next. I thought that the best thing I could do for the time being be to leave the room. For some reason, I ran up to the roof of the apartment building. I can't tell you why I did this. I was panicked, sleep-deprived, and honestly pretty terrified. I wasn't thinking straight. I just needed to get away from that woman's screams and that horrible banging sound. Once I got onto the roof and I'd composed myself, I called the police. This is where you're all going to think I'm such an idiot. The police told me they would be there in no longer than 10 minutes. So I decided to go back down to my room to get a look at who was down there. For some reason, I felt the need to see that woman's face. It's such a stupid thing to do now that I think back to it, but at the time, I just couldn't help it. I got back down there, presumably fueled by adrenaline, and I couldn't get my door open. Something else was wrong. It didn't sound as if she was outside anymore. I pressed my ear to my door and realized that the woman was in my room. I could hear her laughing and going wild in there. Immediately, I returned to the safety of the roof. Since my room no longer felt safe, the roof was all I had left. While I was up there, I heard the police arrive. I went downstairs again with my keys at their request and unlocked my door. Then I swiftly darted behind a police officer. With the door now open, I could see the woman in my room running rampant. She looked so angry. Her hair was unkempt, and she just glared at us in such a horrible manner. She was shouting someone's name that wasn't my own. Like they say, humans are scarier than any ghost story, and she petrified me. The officers restrained her and took her away. I had to go to the police station to make a statement, but before I did, I took one look around my apartment and saw that everything was destroyed. There was glass smashed everywhere, plates, my TV, everything. The most devastating thing was to see my PC there in ruins. No more games. According to a couple of stories I heard after the events from the residents and the police, the woman was having some sort of an affair with the former resident in my apartment. Some had said that she was in the hospital for a good while for her mental health, and when she was discharged, this was the first place she came to exact some sort of revenge on her ex-lover. It was all a case of mistaken identity. I had to rebuy all the stuff she trashed since I didn't have home insurance. I moved apartments too, since I didn't want a repeat of that night. It took a long while to get together enough money to get a new PC. I don't use this new one for gaming though. I am studying harder than I ever have before. If you live alone, please take care of yourself and stay safe. It sounds cliché, but what happened to me was so terrifying, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. This happened to me last December. It's the most frightening thing that has ever happened to me. I began living alone last summer. I managed to get an apartment pretty close to my parents' house. It was in a 2-story building. My apartment was on the 2nd floor and in the middle. The rent was cheap, and I loved having my own independence. I went to a party, drank a lot, and got the last train back home. I arrived at my station and started walking home. The thing about the area I lived in was that it was a little shady. It's probably somewhere you don't want to be walking around alone at night. There are lots of alleys. I didn't really mind though, since my parents lived close by. I remember I was stumbling along in my tipsy state, searching in my handbag for my keys as I drew closer to my apartment. I was only about 30 meters away from my apartment when I heard something strange. It sounded like there was something continuously banging against something. Had it been the afternoon, it would have been easy to imagine that this sound would be a construction worker or someone doing DIY. But at night, it was odd, and it was getting louder the closer I approached the apartment block. I went up the stairs, and when I turned the corner, I froze in horror. In front of my apartment, there was a woman. She was banging at my door with her fist in a monotonous rhythmic pattern. I could instantly tell that there was something wrong with this person. She looked like a ghost. She looked so pale, exhausted, and frightening. I felt like running off back to my parents' house. I didn't want to tangle with that woman. I stood there, shaking for a few horrible moments, with my keys in hand, and then I heard them fall to the floor. As soon as my keys hit the ground, the strange woman stopped her rhythmic banging on my door. I froze. I couldn't pick up my keys. I couldn't take my eyes off her. She turned her head towards me slowly, and the only thing I can remember after that was the sound of my own footfall coming back down the stairs. I ran as fast and as far away as I could. Finally, I stopped in front of a nearby convenience store. I guess I must have dropped my cell phone while I sprinted. I asked to use the one at the convenience store. I don't think I was capable of walking down any more dark alleys or countryside roads in search of a phone booth. The police came and they went to my place. My keys and my phone couldn't be found, unfortunately. But on the upside, there were no signs of intrusion to my apartment. I stayed with my parents that night. I arranged for the locks to be changed, but I didn't feel like moving back in there. The threat of that woman coming back was too much for me. I don't know what that was, but I don't ever want to see that woman again. When I think about her, I can't help but shudder. I was too scared to try and call my cell phone to try and figure out where it was. I got my mom to do it. She called, but no one answered. I stopped the service to that phone a day later. I didn't like it. I didn't want to go back to that apartment. I moved in with my parents, but there was an issue. My parents have a cat, and I have a parakeet. Like I said before, it was a good job my parents lived so close by, so my parents could go back and forth to feed the parakeet. We can't keep this up forever, though. I don't know why, but I feel like that woman has a grudge against me. Hey everyone. This one is more of an urban legend than a true story, but they say there's truth in urban legends, don't they? Let me know what you think if this happened to you. I am a psychiatrist by profession, and I'm often asked about my experiences with patients, and when I tell people this experience, they always encourage me to share it with the web. And since this doesn't include a patient as such, I feel as if I can share it. I'm gonna keep names, locations, and all personal information out of this. I'm going to try and keep it as short as possible, too. I don't think I've had a stranger encounter than this one. There was a family of 3, a couple in their 60s and their son who was in his 30s, who moved into the neighborhood. They actually moved in next door. The son seemed to be hikikomori. If you are unfamiliar with this term, it basically means socially withdrawn. It's an extreme avoidance of social contact. It seems to be more common in adolescent men. So the son was socially withdrawn and was seldom seen. The word got around the neighborhood and reached my ears that this was the case. I personally didn't even get a chance to meet him. I guess they moved to my area to try and get the sun back into the groove, so to speak. I think it didn't work because no one ever saw him. He apparently didn't even leave his room anymore. I know this because I live next door. I could hear the mom yelling at her son to get up and come out of his room. I used to see her around the neighborhood, and she looked as if she was getting more and more tired every time I saw her. About half a year after they moved in, I got a knock at my door. I went and answered it to see the father from next door stood at the doorstep looking glum. He said, "Doctor, I want you to come to my house tomorrow night. I could really use your help." Although I'd never done a private medical examination on a potential patient, I accepted. Not only would it improve my home life, his wife shouting at the son was irritating now and then. It would also help him and his family out, and despite the situation, I liked his wife and him. I agreed to come over the following night, so after work, I stopped by my neighbors and prepared myself to speak with the son. The mother and father welcomed me at the door and invited me inside. They led me upstairs, and the mother said, "Here it is." We were in front of what I guessed was the son's bedroom. The mother started shouting at her son, "Open the door," and stuff like that. The father then just opened the door. The mom yells at the son again as we go into the room. "How long have you been sleeping? Get up and do something with your day." She throws back the covers, and the sight I saw nearly made me hit the deck. There was a faceless mannequin lying in the bed. It had no clothes on it. The father then turned to me and said, "It's my wife I want to talk to you about. She cannot accept the loss of our son." This all started about a year ago. I'm a 23-year-old female. I live on the second floor of an apartment complex and have lived here my entire life. The building is mostly comprised of families with young children and married couples. A lot of the families have lived here as long as my family have, so everyone knows each other pretty well. There is only one apartment unit that isn't occupied by a family, but rather by a pair of brothers who keep to themselves. One day, one of their sons, around my age, appeared out of the blue. He was strange right off the bat. He would always wear a sweatshirt with the hood up and would run through the apartment complex to get to his apartment. I'm not sure what his face looked like, because he always had the hood over it. He lived on the first floor, on the back side of the complex, and would often get into his place by jumping through the window. He basically did everything in his power to avoid any interaction. I didn't mind him because I never saw him due to my busy schedule. However, one day, he started sitting on the top of the staircase that leads to my apartment. This was strange because his apartment was on the other side of the complex and on the first floor. I brushed it off at first, but it started happening every day. When I would come home from school, he was there. When my boyfriend at the time would drop me off at night, typically around 10:30 to 11, he would be there. Sometimes when I would leave and come back hours later, he would still be in the exact same spot, as if he didn't move through the 5+ hours I was gone. At this point, I told my parents and my boyfriend about it, and they became very vigilant. My boyfriend would park his car and walk me to my door every night when he dropped me off. Once he saw my boyfriend, he stopped sitting on the staircase, and I thought it was over, but it wasn't. He started waiting for me at my bus stop. The bus I take home from school stops right across the street from my home, so it's a short walk. One day, when I was getting off, I saw him waiting at the bus stop. Once he saw me get off, he followed me into the complex and sat on the staircase. He also started following me when I walked my dog. At this point, my parents were upset. My mom started letting the neighbors know he was following me around. My neighbors started making sure he wasn't bothering me, or if I was alone, they would start a conversation with me until I got into my door. One day, I got a friend request on Facebook from this guy. Mind you, he had never spoken a word to me, so how did he know my name, let alone find me on Facebook? My mom tried talking to his father, but they would never answer the door when my mom knocked. I was thinking, it couldn't possibly get any worse, right? He seemed harmless, so I wasn't too worried. I was wrong. One day, when I returned from my boyfriend's house, my mom told me she had something to tell me, but she didn't want me to get spooked. She proceeded to tell me that when she was walking towards the kitchen to get a glass of water, she saw something in the tree move. If someone were to climb the tree, you could see into our apartment. Well, guess what? When my mom took a closer look, she realized my neighbor was sitting in the tree, looking straight into the apartment. My mom called my dad over, and when my neighbor saw my dad, he jumped out of the tree. At that moment, I felt that my peace was stolen from me. We filed a police report, but when the police went looking for him, he was gone. It turned out there were snack wrappers and a blanket hidden between the branches of the trees. The police suspected that wasn't the first time he was up in the tree. I couldn't help but wonder how many times he saw me walking around without me having any idea. It's been about 6 months, and I haven't seen him since. His father still lives in the complex, but there's no sign of him. The police haven't been able to find him, so I have no idea what happened to him. But I hope we never meet again. It's been a while, guys. I've been taking some time to figure out the next steps for the channel, especially after the demonetization. Right now, the narration community is being hit pretty hard, and a lot of channels like this one have been affected. There's J Nightmares, Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, Campfire Tales, Hong Kong Horror. Because of that, I cannot continue with the traditional black screen format here on YouTube, so I've had to adapt. I had, and I want to emphasize had, an enhanced partner manager, which is, I guess, one tier above partner manager. And they were able to discuss the situation with, I guess, someone else who was more in the know. And all we could get from that was that black screen was not enough. Reddit stories were not enough. So I've had to adapt. Going forward, I'm building custom visuals for each episode using Unreal Engine 5. That means designing environments, setting up shots, and rendering everything. It's a much more time-intensive process, but it allows me to keep bringing these stories to you. I know a lot of you love the black screen videos for sleep, and I haven't ignored that. You can still listen in audio-only format over on Spotify and Patreon. I've also had to make the difficult decision to unlist the black screen catalog while I work on getting the channel monetized again. It kills me to unlist everything, but in order for me to be monetized, to get paid, to do this as a job, and to keep bringing the content to you guys, it's sadly what I have to do. The best way to support the channel is to head over to Spotify and start listening to the content on there, following me over there, and engaging as well through the comment system. Spotify is the place that saved my ass. If it weren't for that, I more than likely would have had to put the channel down and pursued another career. So if you can, head on over and check the content there. It helps the channel more than you know. And to get the message out there to more people, like, share, and drop a comment. So while I have to unlist the black screen videos, it should mean that I can continue making you guys content. I'll be putting more focus into visual episodes here on YouTube. Let me know how you're finding them and whether you prefer a darker, more minimal look. So, thanks for sticking with me. I truly appreciate it. And as always, like, share, and drop a comment. I'd like to hear how you've been.